If you haven't watched KOSDFF's video regarding his imminent court date and possible need to relocate, link is in the description, as the rest of this commentary assumes that you've listened to it and know the story told within that video. Normally, I don't give a shit about the lives of other YouTubers, but this case intrigued me for two reasons. One, it will set a precedent for other people that are primarily YouTubers as their source of income, not that I'm one of them, but two, I'm the president of an HOA for a community in which I live. So I think I can offer a unique perspective on things, even though local rules will most likely be different since I'm in New York and he's in Georgia. It's unclear whether the two summons that he received were due to violations of HOA rules or violations of town and city rules. An HOA can make rules and is responsible for the common areas of the property on which he lives that can go beyond those of the town or the city requiring. For example, parking on the street. In my city, it's legal to park on the street unless a sign indicates otherwise, whereas in my development, it's against the rules to park anywhere on the street, which is the same in his case. I'm going to operate under the assumption that these are HOA rules and not town or city rules, as I can provide insight on the former but not the latter. But first and foremost, before you move into a community which has an HOA, please read the rules and regulations document beforehand so that you're familiar with the bylaws. This whole ordeal probably could have been prevented with some due diligence on his part. I can't tell you how many times we have to inform new neighbors about their violations, and their response is almost always, "Oh, I didn't realize that was a rule." Anyways, my HOA wanted to have a similar rule to prohibit any resident from operating a business inside their home or using their home as a place of business. The rationale behind this being that there would be excessive foot traffic, lots of cars coming and going, which increases the chances of accidents and strangles the parking situation for visitors if one unit is going to be using up tons of parking spaces for their clients. These are all things an HOA wants to prevent. Now, since KOSDFF doesn't have people coming into his house to conduct business, all of these points are basically moot since they don't apply in his scenario. This is where I think he could submit a homeowner request to have an exception to this HOA rule, and if the HOA board is reasonable, as I am with mine, this shouldn't be a problem since there's no adverse effect on the community. Additionally, the HOA cannot make rulings on the activities that go on inside of a condo or townhome. The owner, or renter, is responsible for everything inside of their four walls, with the HOA being responsible for everything else, which is called common property. The only exception to this is if the activities negatively affect the common grounds or the homes of other residents on the property, such as playing loud music to disturb others, or something like putting a bird feeder on your deck, as it could attract unwanted animals to the property. My HOA wanted to make a rule such that homeowners would use their garages as their first place to park cars before putting them in the driveway, and lastly, in visitor parking if the other spots are used up. The problem is that the garage is technically considered inside the domicile of a resident, so therefore the HOA has no jurisdiction to make a rule that requires a homeowner's garage to be cleaned at all times in order to fit a car in it. Even though it does adversely affect the common property with regard to visitor parking, if somebody wanted to be a hard ass about us fining them for this parking infraction, the HOA can't demand that the garage be filled with a car instead of your shit that you somehow feel the need to keep around but never actually use. The second violation that he was hit with was regarding multiple unrelated people dwelling in the home. Similar to the previous situation, my HOA board wanted to implement a ruling whereby owners couldn't rent out their condos to college students because of the reputation of a bunch of kids that are finally out of the clutches of their helicopter parents. We mulled it back and forth whether to put an age restriction, which is actually against federal discrimination laws, or to include a similar clause as KOSDFF's violation in that more than two people that aren't related can't live with inside one residence. However, much like in the previous case, the HOA can't dictate the happenings inside of the place of residence. Like I recommended earlier, he should submit a request to the HOA for an exception to this rule, since the people that live inside the house actually have jobs and aren't a bunch of rowdy college kids, they're responsible adults. Additionally, he said that only his name was on the lease of the property, then technically there aren't multiple people permanently residing at this location, only himself. Now, I know there might be additional definitions of what constitutes as a person's permanent dwelling, so this isn't really legally sound. However, it seems that since he's the only signer of the lease, this is something important to call out. In my HOA, the owner, and not the lessee, is responsible for paying fines and telling the lessee of the rules of the community. If the owner/landlord of the property did not properly inform them of the HOA bylaws, then it could potentially void the lease agreement given the circumstances with which the lease was agreed to. It'll be interesting interesting to see what happens with this case, as I'm sort of intrigued from the perspective of someone who serves on an HOA board. I saw people in the comments section miffed at a neighbor that would complain about parking in the street or keeping their lights on, but believe me, there's always at least one person in every community that wants to play cop with regard to the HOA rules. Anyways, I've been the Schwantz 27, out like the Chargers in San Diego. Until next time.